March 8th, when President Trump first delivered news of the summit with Kim Jong-un, the left and the media were in shock. How could Trump, of all people, suddenly have a shot at forging peace with this communist dictatorship, maybe even force it to denuclearize when all of these other presidents had failed? After Trump's war of words with Little Rocket Man, which Dems warned could usher in a nuclear war, the sudden prospect of peace was frankly just more than they could stand. And somehow they said it was dangerous.
The State Department, our closest allies, I'm sure people on the Hill, nobody knew about this. Donald Trump just decided to play reality TV show president to change the headline.
This is having Trump and Kim Jong-un, when both are known to be volatile. You don't know who's going to try to be the big man in that room. It injects a risk of literally nuclear proportions.
It has been the dream of North Korean leaders for decades now that they would advance their missile programs and their nuclear programs so much so that the United States would be forced to acknowledge them as an equal. I don't know whether or not the administration intended it to be that kind of a gift.
Jeffrey Lewis is an expert in nonproliferation, and he wrote today that Donald Trump agreeing to meet with Kim Jong-un is like, quote, Richard Nixon going to China, but if Nixon were a moron.
Well, speaking of morons, this crowd and the prospect of a summit to them was not only dangerous, but the president was a fool for engaging the North Koreans at all. And now they're shifting narratives again. The same chain of fools is saying that the cancellation of the summit is what's really perilous itself, and that Trump's impetuous diplomacy and inexperience, of course, are at fault. The headline in the Washington Post screamed, "Trump impulsively blows up the North Korea summit." The editorial board blamed Trump for what it called a hasty, strategy-free improvisation that has characterized his handling of the diplomatic opening all along. The Post warned, never has such chaos attended the public behavior of a U.S. president on a matter of such gravity. Oh, and here's how the Trump-hating cable news outlets reacted.
For the president to have raised expectations to the point to say, listen, I'm in charge here, I got it, we can sit down, I'm going to work this out, was a little unrealistic.
The art of diplomacy is a lot harder than the art of the deal.
Does the administration actually have a long-term game plan here?
I think a lot of people probably are secretly relieved.
That's
certainly among
secretly.
the
I don't think it's a secret. I think there's a lot of relief.
Yeah. Let's go to Peter Alexander, who's live at the White House.
Yeah.
Peter, this is a huge wow for us.
Wait, did you catch that? A wow for us bit? Well, at least Stephanie Ruhle is kind of implicitly admitting that the media do not exist to report on Trump, but to revel in his perceived missteps. That's a wow for us. Oh, my gosh. These people haven't been this happy since they thought Oprah would run for president. They're thrilled today. Well, Trump is damned if he does. He's damned if he doesn't. We all know that. But might I offer another possibility here? Trump's retreat from the summit might have been a grand negotiating tactic, not an admission of failure at all. It might have been a way of testing Kim's seriousness and squeezing maybe a few more concessions from him. The president has already gotten Little Rocket Man to hand over the American hostages, and they've allegedly detonated that nuclear testing facility, although that might not be as big a story as we hoped. That the AP is reporting that the North violated its pledge to allow these international inspectors to monitor the supposed implosion. But this was part of the reason Trump backed away from the summit table. The North Korean dictator had also bristled at talk of denuclearizing his country, and that is a non-negotiable for Trump. We also learned that North Korean officials never showed up for preliminary talks in Singapore last week. That was a surprise. But if you read the president's letter today, he clearly left the door open to a peace deal and tells Kim, look, if you change your mind having to do with this important summit, please do not hesitate to call me or write. It's like a pen pal. I love that. By pulling the plug on the summit, the president may well have applied the needed pressure. And that tough stance, along with continued economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation, may ultimately convince Kim Jong-un to actually make a serious deal. There are now signs that the Trump strategy could be working. North Korea's vice foreign minister, in a statement tonight, says, our goal and will to do everything for peace and stability of the Korean Peninsula and mankind remains unchanged. We're always willing to give time and opportunity to us to side with a big and open mind. We express our intent that there is a willingness to sit at any time and any way to resolve issues. Of course, the North Koreans are still ruling out total denuclearization. It's not really surprising. Might be a tactic on their part. My take, let the media cheer what they hope is another Trump setback. Let them rally against peace and against American leadership in the world. But behind the scenes, Trump may pull off a peace deal yet. And he might just prove them wrong once again. And that's the angle. Let's discuss today's remarkable series of events with our first guest, Asia politics expert Gordon Chang, author of the 2000 book, Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World, and Harry Kazianis, Director of Defense Studies at the Center for the National Interest. Gordon, your take here.
I think the important thing is that what we heard from the North Koreans after President Trump said he was withdrawing from the summit, because it was a string of unusually conciliatory messages, and then the message that you just read, that is a real indication that the North Koreans think that they've overplayed their hand. They really need a summit with President Trump. They want sanctions relief. They want the United States not to strike their nuclear facilities. They want a counterweight to China. And, of course, they want the legitimization of a meeting with the President of the United States. So I think the North Koreans have really thought maybe we went too far. And we're seeing, I think, a really good series of events that will occur. And there may actually be a summit, Harry. Well, so I think we're going to be on a good path.
Well, Harry, I want to play for you something that Nancy Pelosi said today, which, I mean, we were howling earlier. We're editing this bite. Let's watch.
I think it's a good thing for Kim Jong-un. Here you had a thug, a person who killed his own family members, a person who runs a police state being legitimized by the President of the United States. They were on a par with each other. He got global recognition and regard. He's the big winner. And when he got this letter from the President saying, okay, never mind, he must be having a giggle fit.
I have a giggle fit when I try to diagram Nancy's sentences. Harry, go ahead.
I don't even know what to say, Laura. I mean, I think you have to give President Trump a lot of credit here. Think about where we were, Laura, going back to the summer. We were on the brink of nuclear war. Let that set in for a minute. That is millions of people that would have died. The North Koreans every day in their labs, they don't need to sling missiles all across the Pacific, are getting closer to an ICBM. I think that is why they've stalled. And don't worry, Gordon, I don't think there's still going to be a summit. I still think the North Koreans are stalling, and I do not rule out their duplicitousness. We have to remember who we're dealing with. It's like negotiating with Lucifer.
Yeah, they lie constantly. Yeah. They overpromise and underdeliver, or just violate their promises.
Absolutely.
I want to bring in the thing that you and I talk about a lot, Gordon, on radio, which is the role of President Xi of China in all of this, because there were two trips by Kim Jong-un to meet with Xi. The president himself mentioned that things seem to have changed from the North Korean perspective after that meeting with Xi. What could be the role that China is playing as this dance continues?
I think what basically Beijing is doing is telling the North Koreans, you don't have to deal with the international community. You don't need to speak with President Trump. You know, if we look back over the last 2 or 3 months, we see China's sanctions busting has really become blatant. When Kim went to Beijing the first time, they allowed North Korean media to show all the gifts that Xi had given to Kim, $394,000 worth of porcelain, silk, jewelry. This was a sanctions violation because you're not allowed to give luxury items to North Koreans. And what President Xi Jinping was saying was, look, I'm violating UN sanctions, but even better, I'm going to give you proof that I'm violating them. And this is really a challenge to the United States. And President Trump met that challenge on Monday and Tuesday by saying, look, I'm calling out the Chinese. I wish he had done that a little bit earlier, because I think we would not have gotten to this place if we had taken on the...
Well, the president has been, this trade thing is coming into play here. I mean, all these different issues on President Trump's plate, the trade, the tariffs, we're trying to get our manufacturing back, the trade deficit. And I've been warning, you've been warning, do not go soft on China. They will not respond with respect if you go soft on them. The promises, they're the same as North Korea in violating promises to help or do this or that.
Yeah, the most important thing that I heard was a tweet from someone named Laura Ingraham, who said 2 Sundays ago when we heard that ZTE tweet, you said, hold the line, Mr. President. That was, I think, critical. And it did change the president's view on this because we see him backtrack from his initial position on ZTE.
By the way, he could have just given Kim Jong-un like a gift certificate to Shoney's. That would have been good enough. The all-you-can-eat breakfast bar would have been fine for him. Let's talk about what Hillary's top advisor, Jake Sullivan, said today about how this whole thing played out. Let's watch.
Am I glad that Donald Trump didn't go to Singapore and meet with Kim Jong-un and have it all blow up in his face and end in spectacular failure? Yes, I'm glad he didn't do that. On the other hand, should he have not made an impulsive and rash decision with no preparation to announce the summit in the first place? No, he shouldn't have. So he's gotten himself into a situation that was not just predictable, it was predicted.
Oh, of course it's not, because now the summit might be back on. I mean, and what success did Hillary Clinton have, as Secretary of State, have with Kim Jong-un?
Zero. I mean,
Zero.
Let's look at the facts here. It's the Obama administration going from 2008 until 2016. Those were the critical years, Laura, where the North Koreans were building their ICBMs, building more chemical weapons.
So hearing him pronounce on what was that, CNN? Pronounce on CNN, well, we're glad he didn't go because he would have done it. Are you kidding me? Like, no one's buying this. We have a possibility of a phased-in, Gordon, correct, denuclearization. Would the Trump administration go for that if it was phased in, where both sides are trying to show good faith? It seems to me that's where we may be going here.
That's where we may be going. Our initial position, though, is that the North Koreans give everything up at the beginning and then we give the benefits at the back end. And we heard Secretary Pompeo talk about that. We heard President Trump talk about it, and of course John Bolton. And this is going to take a little bit of time for us to work out with North Korea. But, President Trump has a lot of leverage here. He can use it not only against the North Koreans, but more important, against the Russians and the Chinese, basically North Korea's big power sponsors. President Trump does that, then yes, I think we get a denuclearized, disarmed North Korea.
And Harry, I always think of Russia, too, in this scenario. We talk about only China and the Korean Peninsula. Gordon brought up how Russia has continued to, send key goods, fuel and so forth into North Korea. This is where a better relationship with Russia would have served us well, too. Yeah. Triangulating, the idea that China should call all the shots in the way we deal with North Korea. But now we're like hands off with Russia. We can't have a better relationship with Putin because Adam Schiff might get unhappy. Right. I find this to be ridiculous. Right. We should be working with Putin to the extent that we can, with our eyes wide open, to triangulate on this relationship with China. I think it would be in a much better position.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the Russians could be a spoiler here. Imagine if things get worse in Syria or we have some sort of armed conflict there. The Russians could use the North Koreans as the ultimate bargaining chip. They could give them air defenses. They could give them a ton of military equipment, give them $1 billion to buy arms. We don't need that, to be honest with you. A decent working relationship with Russia is not a bad thing.
We just need it. I mean, and I know, John Bolton and all these guys at the White House, I mean, they feel like they're kind of, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't on this, but it's needed for our national security. And by the way, Putin today said he was unhappy about the cancellation of the summit, if you saw that. Gordon, I want to ask you about the foreign policy elites who laughed at Trump during the campaign when he came out with that list of foreign policy advisors, which included Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. They were not the best people to put on a list, but nevertheless, they mocked Donald Trump. He was inexperienced. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know the ways of the world, and he is new to all this. But I think it's really kind of interesting that a guy who came in with almost no experience in this arena has at least gotten us a lot farther in holding China accountable. Again, we'll have to see where that goes. And maybe actually having this meeting with North Korea that could advance our interests. That's pretty amazing.
The important thing here is that President Trump has taken on these issues and is willing to actually advance American interests. We have the two preceding presidents who sort of just tried to manage things, and because they did that, a lot of problems in the world got worse. The world did not become instantly dangerous when President Trump took the oath of office.
I think it's safer. I think without a doubt it's safer. I don't think it's more dangerous. It was more dangerous when America was getting weaker and weaker and weaker on
absolutely.
further and further in debt, which why we have to watch our debt too.
And the reason reason is, as I said, it doesn't become dangerous then. It became dangerous over a long period of time.
Yep.
Trump is dealing with it. He's in a very disadvantageous situation on trade, on North Korea, on Iran, and a lot of other things. And, you know, there's a lot that has to be done and a lot that we don't know, but at least he's trying, and that's critical.
Where do we think China gets the $1 trillion that's going to put in its Made in China 2025 program? Where do we think they got that $1 trillion from our deficit? That's where they got it.
On Tuesday, Trump actually said, look, they just dedicated a new aircraft carrier. We paid for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's absolutely right.
We have paid for the rise of perhaps a future dominant superpower that eclipses the United States. That should scare every American watching this show tonight. Donald Trump led on that issue, and he cannot let up. Donald Trump said this today, and the question, I think, here is even more important than the answer. Let's watch.
The breakdown of this summit raised the risk of war with North Korea?
Well, we'll see what happens. I hope that we'll continue onward. We'll see. But we are in a very strong position.
Why do they always go the risk? Again, going to Gordon's point, the risk of war. The risk of war was allowing this to happen over the course of the last 20 years.
Laura, there's a deal here, and I don't think it takes somebody with a PhD from Princeton to figure this out. It's step by step. Here it is. North Koreans give up 1 or 2 nuclear weapons, we take off some sanctions. They give up a few chemical weapons, we take off some sanctions. Step by step by step to build trust. If the North Koreans cheat, maximum pressure comes back on. We don't give up an inch. That's how we start this. And the key thing here, the North Koreans give up the goods first. That's how we do this. I think there is a deal to be had here.
He's open to it, clearly. I think he's open to it. He's expressed kind of a, you got to come out with everything that you want, and then you can back off a little bit. But, Gordon, I think I'm positive about this. I'm very optimistic.
Well, we have the tools, and President Trump can use them. You know, if, for instance, we get a good deal with Kim Jong-un and we can verify it, then we can ignore what the Chinese have been doing. But if we have problems in talking with him, then I think we have to go after the Chinese and we have to go after the Russians.
Cannot let up on that.
We can do this, Laura. You know, people just sort of assume, oh, what do the Chinese want? What do the North Koreans want? And they always they forget that the United States has the power to push these countries in better directions. You know, this is Reagan. You know, after that period of decline in Carter saying,
America's back. Yeah,
America's back.
And by the way, next time someone asks the president about a Nobel Peace Prize, he should say, look, I don't think I have the talent of Barack Obama to get a peace.